Hi, everyone. This is Mr. Quesada. Stay tuned this week as we'll be sending out a lot of information that'll pertain to the hybrid reopening scheduled for next Tuesday, February 16th. I know it's kind of like starting the year again. It's familiar, but it's unfamiliar at the same time. Now, back in August, at the start of the first semester, I told you a quick story about perseverance and starting over, and it was centered around the great inventor, Thomas Edison, and how later in his life, part of his vast headquarters had burned down. With that, it was triggered by the explosion of nitrate film. Nitrate film at that time was composed of nitrous cellulose. It was also called gun cotton. And it was essentially a replacement for gunpowder in munitions, so it was highly combustible. And that night, it caused an incredible amount of damage. And worse, it was near his research and development labs. So it took with it irreplaceable prototypes, papers, documents, research, you name it. A lot of Edison's life work was engulfed in those flames. And by the time of his death in 1931, he had almost 1,100 patents. In fact, it wasn't until 2003 that someone had accumulated more. So I was curious about this, especially about what drove him to carry on when he had already achieved so much in his life. So I found an article written in 2014 by a writer named Richard Filoni. And I'm quoting Richard Filoni here in this next part. He says, at around 5:30 in the evening on December 10th, 1914, a massive explosion erupted in West Orange, New Jersey. 10 buildings in legendary inventor Thomas Edison's plant, which made up more than half of the site, were engulfed in flames. Between 6 and 8 fire departments rushed to the scene, but the chemical-fueled inferno was too powerful to be put out very quickly. According to a 1961 Reader's Digest article by Edison's son Charles, Edison calmly walked over to him as he watched the fire destroy his dad's work. Edison told his 24-year-old son, "Go get your mother and all her friends. They'll never see a fire like this again." When Charles objected, Thomas Edison said, "It's all right. We've just gotten rid of a lot of rubbish." Now, later at the scene of the blaze, Edison was quoted by the New York Times as saying, "Although I am over 67 years old, I will start again tomorrow." He told the reporter that he was exhausted from remaining at the scene and that the chaos was under control, but he stuck to his word and immediately began rebuilding the next morning. And he did this without firing any of his employees. In his book, The Obstacle is the Way, The Timeless Art of Turning Trials into Triumph, author Ryan Holiday says, "To do great things, we need to be able to endure tragedy and setbacks. We've got to love what we do and all that it entails, the good and the bad. We have to learn to find joy in every single thing that happens." Now, I'm quoting Richard Filoni again. He said after surveying the damage, Edison determined that he'd lost $900,000 and a lot of things that couldn't be replaced by money. That's about $23 million in today's money. Now, keep in mind, this is a side note, Edison was nearly 68. And to put that in perspective, the average life expectancy in 1914 for men was 52. Now, that didn't mean people died necessarily at the age of 52. It meant that the infant mortality rate was much higher. And people died of chronic illnesses like heart disease and cancer much younger because the treatment at that time was not very developed. As a matter of fact, when Edison does die, 16 years later, it will be from complications of diabetes. Filoni says that the flames consumed 10 buildings and years of priceless records and prototypes, and his plant's insurance only covered about a third of the total damage. Now, there are two great parts of the story that I didn't share with you before. Within days, Edison received a check for $750,000. There was a note with it that said, "This is a loan. No interest." It also said, "If you need more, just ask." So who was this from? Now, you've heard of the Ford Motor Company. It was from his friend Henry Ford, the founder of the Ford Motor Company. And you might ask yourself, why was Ford so generous? Well, I wondered that too. Many years earlier, Edison was working on an electric car and built batteries that made it viable to a point. He had heard of a young man named Henry Ford who worked for one of Thomas Edison's companies in Detroit, Michigan as a chief engineer. Ford was working on a gasoline engine, and Edison went to see him and asked him many questions about it. Ford impressed Edison so much that Edison followed up with him and encouraged him to keep working on it. Now keep in mind, at the time of their meeting in the late 1890s, Thomas Edison was one of the most revered people in America. He symbolized America at the time, really. He came from very humble beginnings. He was self-educated. He was an incredible thinker, an incredible builder. He was an incredible entrepreneur. Everybody looked up to him. Henry Ford later said that getting encouragement from someone like that, someone held in such high regard, made all the difference in his life. Ford went on to produce the Ford Model T automobile a few years later. And at about this time, that's how popular it was, by about 1918, 50% of all the cars in the United States were Model Ts. And he was just getting started. He became a business icon and one of the richest men in the world. So what happened to Edison after this fire? Well, Filoni writes, Edison got part of the plant up and running again. His employees worked double shifts and set to work producing more than ever. Edison and his team, remember this happened in December of 1914, went on to make almost $10 million in revenue the following year. So if you're keeping track, that's about $261 million in today's money. Filoni points out in his article that when tragedy strikes, you must accept that it's happened and accept that you cannot change the past. Finding the opportunity to overcome a challenge ultimately makes you stronger. It's very true. Now we're heading back into this semester. We've faced many challenges, and we will face more challenges. There's no doubt about it. And also, as you come back, think about who you will encourage. I love this part of the story where here's Thomas Edison, already a giant in the world, and he takes time to encourage this young man, Henry Ford. It cost Edison nothing. Yet years later, when he needed help, one of the first people to come to his aid was his old friend, to whom he felt he owed so much, all over a few words of confidence. None of us know the power of some well-timed kindness and a few words of comfort to someone who needs it. Trust me, someone needs it every day. I do. Keep in mind, whenever you put that into action as we come back. We're going to have a great semester. It isn't going to be like any of the semesters that preceded it, but we're going to finish it together. I want to thank you in advance for your perseverance and encouraging one another. It helps us all be stronger. Thanks, everyone. I hope you have a great week.